Last time on The German Century. We began in 1910, guiding Germany through a long World War I. Then out of the pot and into the pan, Germany dealt with both the dead and the economic recovery, and in the later half of the 20s, the roaring cultural scene of the German Expressionist movement. However, in 1936, the Berlin stock market crash would bring all the triumphs and tribulations of the empire to be for naught. A renewed economic and military crisis looms. The Russian eagle spreads its wings, and the syndicalist West watch us struggle. Can Germany survive? The Berlin stock market reached an all-time high, but growth can only last so long. The market bubble was plagued by overvaluation of assets, and as asset prices rose, the bubble eventually had to burst. The inaction of Chancellor Papen was to blame. Not just Germany, but all of Middle Europa, hell, the world, will now suffer from our failures. The economic collapse must be addressed, and swiftly. Van Papen works alongside the Reichstag to formulate a comprehensive response plan, while the aging Kaiser supervises. Rhinish workers strike amid layoffs, pay cuts, and the banning of the FAUD, a major syndicalist-aligned trade union. A repeat of 1919 occurs on our streets, and we must work to avert any escalations. The Chinese, a major spot of foreign influence, begin to collapse in on themselves as European economic influences wane under the weight of bankruptcy. The Russians seize the opportunity to make demands of us at a weak point, but their economy likewise reels from the crash. After the death of Kerensky, the Russians are in no place to make demands. Yet, America, who banked their long-term economic recovery on us, foolishly pursued prohibition in the 1920s. The massive smuggling network created as a result led to the conservative government being forced into an odd position. Beset by mass-organized crime, they had to backtrack. Not only was this unpopular with their own base, but the still divided nation struggled to cope with the Berlin stock market crash. The Windsors, now exiled in Canada, do their best to aid their troubling American neighbor, but America, leading into 1937, collapses regardless. A third American Civil War, truly a continuation of the second, aims to answer with finality the questions posed in the last conflict. Whether the way of the South, the socialist, or of Roosevelt will prevail. In Spain, the cursed kingdom finds itself a victim of internal divides. A pretender, a legitimist, and a syndicalist government competing for control of Iberia. Poland and Lithuania, jointly reeling from the economic downfall, unify into one, the Commonwealth reborn under the German House of Urach. I wonder if it'll last. Ukraine takes increasingly strong measures despite our subsidies to them, eventually kicking out the hetman Skoropadsky before consolidating the Habsburg rule over Kiev. Georgia, long under the rule of Mensheviks, restored a monarchy after conservatives won, electing one of our own Hohenzollern sons to the throne and joining our faction to aid in their recovery. All of this while turmoil in Indochina leads to a massive uprising in Ostasian, which ultimately succeeds. This series of major crises, commonly referred to in history as the lull, causes the public to slowly but surely lose faith in the DKP. However, our choice to trust in the strength of our economic pact has paid off. Our recovery under Hjalmar Schacht has been grand, if slow. Recovery continues well into 1937. Minister Hjalmar begins meetings with various large industrial companies in order to broker deals in February. Siemens and Krupp, among others, become some of the largest contract holders in Germany for new economic stimuli projects, placing Siemens on a pedestal ensures a thriving industrial and electronics sector. But it is now March 1937. Ballots are in, and the results are clear. The FVP acquires an electoral mandate, Chancellor Erich Koch-Wesser being the first FVP chancellor, allying itself with parties such as the SPD and the NLP. A center-left coalition returns at the head of Germany in a tumultuous time. With America fracturing and the Russians and Sindies on the move, our empire is under threat. Under pressure of economic tensions following the untimely death of Kerensky, Boris Savinkov used General Kornilov to acquire power over Russia. The lack of a civil war in Russia, unlike in the West, means Russia is an economic beast despite our circumcision of its frontier. Under the ultra-nationalist Savinkov, we know a war will come to our realm. The only question is when. And when inevitably Savinkov does rush in, the syndicalists to our west will exploit the same opportunities. Perhaps the syndicalists will start the war first. Who can say? The Swedish Commune, a holdover from the 1915 workers' riots in Stockholm, threatens our north, France our west, and Red Britain still remaining a naval thorn in our side. Striking a treaty with the exiles in Canada, there is hope that the future conflict between us and the Reds will be concluded swiftly. For now, the FVP handles much more tame goals. Economic and social reform, namely. One of the largest promises was that of women's suffrage. Suffragettes had been marching during the crisis alongside disgruntled workers. The SPD and FVP took the mantle of workers' champions during the Black Monday crisis, which will soon be resolved thanks to Schacht, though credit will fall into the hands of the FVP coalition. The FVP begins its Hearts and Minds campaign of administrative and economic reform, passing laws on religious freedom, forcing through a bill on progressive taxation which really stirred up some deputies, but Wilhelm II himself found to be an adequate reform. Last but not least was the promotion of our Middle European ties, utilizing foreign workers from abroad here in Germany to grow our output. The arrival of Irish immigrants in Hamburg, symbolizing the first wave of guest workers and one day, perhaps happy residents. The FVP and SPD no longer work to stop German colonization efforts, but they do work to ensure the people are treated properly in these regions. In all parts of the empire, the federal system is archaic but helpful, and the preservation and refinement of the German federal system is paramount to ensuring the little guys are protected. Germany will become more European and more progressive. The FVP holds a tenuous grip, as the SPD is by far the more name-worthy party with a larger share in the coalition. The going belief is the SPD, or perhaps even the National Liberals under war hero Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck, will clinch the next elections. Vorbeck, with all his wealth of war and experience, may yet become an attractive alternative when the flames of conflict become more apparent to our people. For now, the fruits of economic growth and the commerce flow. America may be in shambles, and we're doing our level best to aid our chosen candidate, but the truth is, we only have so much influence on this ever-changing, rearranging world, and we struggle just to maintain what we already have across the world. A major source of our oil and the legacy of our treaty with Russia in the last war, the Caucasian republics have come under threat by the Russians in March 1938. Boris Savinkov declares his ambition to reunite the former imperial lands. The Reichspakt is poised to stop them. The generally argumentative parliament was again united when it came to opposing any attempt at Russian expansion. especially into our oil fields. The Chancellor sent formal invitations to all Caucasian republics to Middle Europa, which were accepted. For the time being, this caused the Russians to back down. Though considered a diplomatic coup, Germany did not reduce its mobilization actions. The Kaiser, the military command, and the SPD coalition worked to rapidly expand German military production from mid-1938 onwards. A rapid reorientation of production from export consumer goods to heavy military industry, along with expanded conscription, prepared Germany for what was inevitably coming. On August 14, 1939, Boris Savinkov invaded the North Caucasian Confederation, and the next day, Reichspakt forces formally joined to defend them. The first skirmishes of the Second World War had just begun. The Alsace Ultimatum saw the entry of France. The syndicalists had been heavily preparing. However, the aggressive Russian state of Savinkov spent only 3 short years preparing after taking control. The mobile forces of Heinz Guderian were to be tested on the Eastern Front. Formations of panzers and motor troops make up highly effective mobile forces against Russian infantry. Savinkov simply was not prepared for the full onslaught of the modern German army. Our landwehr will follow the same strategy of the last war, running down the Russians, then refocusing on the French and British, while our navy clears the seas. Unlike last war, we have complete control of the oceans. The exiles in Canada likewise are throwing in their navies and armies, but we must take Britain and France first. It is optimistic to assume that we can, but Pax Europa is worth any price.
Weil mein Daddy dich gut leiden kann, borgt uns sein Auto. Ja, borgt uns sein Auto, weil mein Daddy dich gut leiden kann. Mit einem Auto sind wir gern gesehene Gäste. Und wo wir aufhäuten, bietet man uns nur das Beste. Please don't stop, ich danke Daddy. Von ihm kam die Idee mit dem roten Sportcoupé. Please don't stop, ich danke Daddy. Von ihm kam die Idee mit dem roten Sportcoupé. Weil mein Daddy dich gut leiden kann, haben wir 2 gut lachen, fahren los mit 80 Sachen, weil mein Daddy dich gut leiden kann. Ich stell das Radio ein und hör die neuesten Schlager. Please don't stop, ich danke Daddy. Von ihm kam die Idee mit dem roten Sportcoupé.
End of 1942. Status report. 1.9 million dead on the Ostfront. Russian casualties edging 8 million. The Kaiser has sadly passed. Wilhelm III has been coronated. Savinkov is in hiding in Siberia. The Russian state has collapsed inward, and we have done what we can to re-establish control over certain areas. Further parts of Caucasia were set free, such as Kalmykia. The new election season is here. The SPD Liberal coalition continues, but a new chancellor is put into place. The Lion, Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck. In the last war, he led the Norwich raids and the subsequent Hull landings. He's a hero that Germany believes will be the leader we need to ensure swift victory. In the spirit of using the same strategies again, a landing, although much larger than the last wars, will tear open Britain at Hull. The idea is that Britain is France's soft spot, and we intend to push it in, then use it as a springboard into France. But our generals on the front believe they can and must take France in the next 150 days. Vorbeck doesn't buy it, but Guderian bets his rank on it. With the French exiles landing solidly in Marseille, we have to take our chances. The London Peace Accords formally designated an end to hostilities. The total surrender of syndicalist forces in France, Britain, and Italy led to complete continental dominance. Charles III, collaborator king, is implanted on the throne of Britain, and the Kaiser's own daughter, Victoria Louise, is placed as Queen of France. The Entente threatens war, but with the victory of our chosen candidate in America, the American Union State, relations with America are shaky at best. The Canadians handed back New England peacefully, but requests to combat Germany, an economic and military partner of the new American administration, was like asking a friend to commit suicide. And so by 1946, isolated, the Entente dismissed any chance of returning home, instead running the empire from Canada, which by the early 50s was falling apart. The communist Indians overran the British Raj. Meanwhile, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa were kept under control, with Rhodesia as well maintaining loyalty. By 1955, the American-led Ottawa Defense Initiative was formed to create a close military and economic partnership between America and Canada. The election of William Dudley Pelley caused quite an entrenchment of Jim Crow laws. Immigration into America would slowly decline, and by 1970, more minorities left for other nations than immigrated to the United States. Despite the power and prominence of America, they maintained neutrality, all but forcing Canada to follow suit. The Entente as a former organization ended when a 1949 referendum ended the Savoyard rule of Sardinia, ceding rule to the Italian Empire. Cooperation between Canada and France continued until the French exiles in Algiers collapsed from inside in 1959. After acquiring re-election in 1947, the SPD maintained a chancellery over Germany since the war's end. After having acquired the absorption of Austria-Hungary into the German Empire directly, the SPD was at an all-time high, merging with SDAPO, an Austrian Social Democratic Party. The SPD maintained a stranglehold on politics for decades. Wilhelm III opposed the SPD bitterly and tried to ally with the dying aristocracy. But he, like the Junkers, went out of fashion, dying in 1951 himself. His son, Louis Ferdinand, styling himself Friedrich IV, was far more amenable to the SPD, allowing them to begin more sweeping reforms with full imperial backing, hearkening back to the missed opportunity of a liberal Kaiser that was Friedrich III, the ill-fated father of Wilhelm II, whose liberal leanings may well have averted the 2 world wars we have experienced all together. The SPD was famously anti-colonial. The major colonies in East Asia and Africa were considered unprofitable and morally counterproductive. In response to the 1959 Algiers crisis, decolonization was successfully pursued. A 10-year goal was set in Parliament in order to prepare to pull out. After just 3, the strain caused Middle Africa to collapse violently, as the French exiles had done. Giving up on control, the continent largely was plunged into anarchy, but it was self-determination, if chaotic. A few minor bases in Namibia and Cameroon were maintained, otherwise, even Indonesia and Malaysia were largely given freedom. The Indonesians had a series of rebel forces who made amicable negotiation partners at the Jakarta Conference of 1965. It was requested that the Free Indonesia maintain neutrality, but they and Thailand absorbed Malaysia, entering the greater East Asian co-prosperity sphere, ensuring Japan's tight grip on Asia for the long term. With the last troops leaving Indonesia in 1967, Germany was considered decolonized by 1970. The remainder of the 20th century is a wild and interesting time period. Germans on the moon in 1966, the invention of the microtransistor supercharging electronics development, the Beatles on tour, the nuclear age in both weapons and energy, but perhaps the most surprising outcome is the resurgence of the Ottomans as a modern and prominent power. Their victory over Egypt in the Desert War of 1939 meant they had control over vast and profitable territory. And administrative reform under Mustafa Kemal centralized their government. Following his death, a new federal government was created, with a new imperial capital in Cairo. Both an Arabic and central city, the Ottomans proclaimed themselves the leader of the Association of Islamic Nations, to much popularity except among Shiite Islam, especially Iran, whose Islamist revolution in 1974 would lead to a series of prolonged conflicts between Iran and the Ottoman Empire. The Habsburg and Hohenzollern monarchs worked tirelessly in Europe to bring Europe closer together. Economic integration reform, federalization proposals, a common army. Nearly every nation in Europe had a German monarch, and many of them were Hohenzollerns. Following a 1989 reform, all Hohenzollern and Urach possessions were inherited directly, and after a period of economic and cultural development, Germany would find that it would obtain the goal it had always longed for. Russia remained out of their reach, but Kaiser Ferdinand's marriage of a Romanov, Kira of Russia, meant his sons may someday have a chance at restoring the Romanovs and unifying Europe truly. As Kaiser Ferdinand approached his deathbed in 1994, he looked back on a life of patronage. The 80s and 90s were nothing short of a cultural revolution in Europe. European fellowship was at an all-time high as the music and culture scenes from Lisbon to Minsk bled into one European cultural revolution. The Hohenzollern Kaisers over the years were, since the death of Wilhelm III, excited patrons of German music and fashion and the arts, both classical and modern. Prince Louis Ferdinand, after the untimely death of Wilhelm III, took the throne as Kaiser. His 43-year reign from 1951 to 1994 highlighted an imperial golden era, only interrupted by our colonial retreat, but otherwise considered a time of great economic, social, and cultural progress. The Neo-Expressionist movement, taking its name from the original movement in the 20s, and the Neue Deutsche Welle became the pinnacle of musical and artistic expression. The death of Ferdinand IV led to the crowning of the 18-year-old Georg Friedrich, who styled himself Georg Friedrich I, opting to take no name of a former Kaiser. Georg Friedrich is Ferdinand's grandson, his last son passing in 1977 due to an accident during a military maneuver. The elder Kaiser did all he could to properly raise Georg. With modern medication and such a young start, Georg could easily rule for the better part of a century. Taking lessons in his early education, Georg guided Europe out of the 90s into the 2000s. The rise of the internet and home computers again revolutionized culture and economics. A whole new economic sector had opened, and Europe was pioneering it as the forefront purveyor of social freedom in a world where it was largely alone in this pursuit. The internet was scary and hard to control for the autocratic Japan or Jim Crow's America, and so it thrived in Europe. Taking advantage of the excellent economic and cultural conditions, the Council of Europe was faced with their most consequential reform yet: total federalization. And without much surprise, after nearly 70 years of prosperity and good feelings, all member states of the European Union agreed. January 10th, 2000 is Federation Day, the Day of Union. The Union of European Kingdoms was created. The process of actual integration will take longer, but gently, with time, Europe will become one. Our continued control of the Suez Canal and the newly radicalized Russian Republic turn the prospects of a peaceful 21st century to be dim. The Ottomans will undoubtedly come for the Suez, and with them, the Russians will hope for a third chance at redemption. The Ottawa Defense Initiative is largely demobilized, tied to the isolationist America's interests. There is no world where the Christian conservatives in America would turn against us in a crusade against Islam. Our situation is a safe one. For now, we can somewhat relax. After years of reform from liberal and social democratic parties across the continent in various nations, Europe has found itself a single federalized entity. How does the federation work? A wonderful question. There is one emperor, one Kaiser, ein Europa, united under Gott und Berlin, the very heart of Europe. France and Britain and Ireland and every little duchy and kingdom across the continent represent a single member. It builds off the German federal system. With all its numerous reforms, it has become more equitable. No minor lord is given special rights, nor major lord given a power monopoly. The European dream we have realized is a decentralized Europe of nations under a single diplomatic and military arrangement. Domestic policy and legislation largely remains up to individual regions, with some exceptions within individual kingdoms, while industrial, trade, and military matters, as they matter to the outside world, remain with the European Federal Council. As such, Italy can still make an Olympic team, win gold, make a trade deal with Germany separate from the rest of Europe, all while external trade flows in or out and is controlled by a single federal policy dictated by the European Council. The political system of Europe is certainly worth looking at. How representatives are chosen, the parties at work. By far, the largest single bloc is the European People's Party, supported by Otto von Habsburg and numerous other politicians and royals. It is a center-right conservative bloc, representing a new ascendancy of pragmatic governance in an ever-changing world. Opposing the EPP is the European successor to the SPD, the SOC, Socialists, Democrats, and Greens, and in coalition with them, ALDE, the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe. Standing in minor opposition are the left radicals in the UEL and the right radicals in the UCPA. Not much has changed from the days of old. It is the center who remains the kingmaker. Without the support of ALDE, the SOC are not enough alone, and neither are the EPP. For a government to form without collapsing, a majority of the European Parliament must be in the ruling coalition. Otherwise, it is dissolved and a new government made. To form a parliament, you need representatives, and you need elections. Every 5 years in each region, elections are handed down to the people who vote for their representatives. There are 1,000 seats divided up according to someone's proportion of the total European population. In a nation of 450 million, assuming Germany makes up 100 of that million, they are a little under 25% of the total seats in the European Parliament. If a nation is only 0.5% of the total European population, they get 5 seats. 1% of the total population is 10 seats. Therefore, representation for even the smallest nations is covered down to 0.1% of the total European population in size. Even Malta has an equal voice. But all legislation must also pass the European Council. Who makes up the Council? Why, the monarchs. But there are many kingdoms, and so the definition of a kingdom under the federal system is different from that within the subdivisions. A federal kingdom must be a continuous national group. So Italy is one kingdom, even if Savoy and Naples are their own kingdoms within Italy. Germany is under the Kaiser, and despite the internal entity of Germany including many regions of non-German ethnicity, they also have federal kings. The Czechs, Hungarians, every nationality with a majority in a territory has a king, and as such, the federation gives that king a weighted vote based on a population calculation done every 10 years, a regulation based on the American census, which ensures each king holds the proper power they should, and that each nation has as many representatives as intended, and there will be no repeat of Thuringian overrepresentation. In this process, the Kaiser is the executive of Europe, the public face and leader, but the European Chancellor still holds the veto, not Kaiser Friedrich. Europe has come very far. Prussian constitutionalism only barely continues to exist today. Gerhard Schroeder is again re-elected Chancellor, continuing the barely challenged center-left SOC-led coalition. A series of economic reforms, including pension reform, welfare reform, and numerous other reforms, including addressing the incoming specter of immigration. He's sworn in by Georg Friedrich I. The new Kaiser is a modern businessman, young, economically savvy, and he takes an active role in policymaking for economic direction. He has big shoes to fill and plenty of detractors. Ferdinand IV left a monolithic 43 years of peace. Few would know just how great Georg Friedrich would go on to be. to more intricately describe the reform plans of Chancellor Schroeder, working with numerous others on the European left such as Tony Blair, he has formulated a brand new third way. A plan to peel back the welfare state through reforms and tax cuts in order to draw new entrepreneurship. While initially unpopular, it found support from centrist and center-right elements in the European Parliament, but expectedly, the left felt it was a betrayal. Sweeping cuts came through, but it was too much for the SOC itself to bear. Internal backlash led to Schroeder being expelled from his position as head of the SOC, and many of his supporters began to peel away. By 2004, in a snap election, the European People's Party had taken the reins under political juggernaut Wilfried Martens, a Belgian prime minister who helped found the EPP alongside figures like Otto von Habsburg. The ALDE coalesced with the EPP to form a center-right coalition, continuing on without the SOC. The division of the old left would take the SOC some time to recover from. Socialist parties were in retreat in many places as the European standard of living grew and the main concerns became economic stagnation. Alongside the legalization of same-sex marriage by Schroeder, certain tax and welfare cuts were maintained by the new government, and some expanded by the Martens government. It led to a massive influx of foreign investment, a huge number of that being from Japan. Which some considered a security concern but was largely ignored. The fruits of the tree of capital too great to concern themselves with. But economics and social issues are not the only problems on our horizon. Europe's oil supply relies on a thin Caucasian strip from Krasnodar to Baku, and to either side, vultures, the oil-hungry Ottomans and the Russian revanchists. Both nations have cause to invade us, and as such, they find in each other unlikely allies. The Ottomans make their move on Iran, a decisive blow using the latest military technology. They vanquish their foe of antiquity and move to take down the socialist government in Algeria alongside Morocco. The Moroccans and Ottomans now were close allies, and the Moroccans added new reasons for war, Spanish Morocco, namely. Our satellites captured images of Ottoman and Russian mobilization and training, obviously preparation for large-scale war. Europe, too, began to mobilize in reaction, silently. Our industry wasn't prepared, but was easily able to be retooled. Entering late 2005, there were worries about our combat readiness. A prolonged engagement would lead to severe supply shortages on the front line, but our analysis seemed to suggest no one was prepared for a prolonged war. But in July of 2006, the Ottomans made their gamble. Demanding the Suez, we mobilized our forces. The Ottomans would not take no for an answer, overrunning the Suez garrison. This could not be let go. War. Total war. We know the consequences, and we know our shortcomings, but we cannot concede now. We will not be pushed around by the scourge of Europe. The Arabians turncoat in exchange for a large portion of Arab lands. They will hand us the keys to the Ottoman castle. Flooding forces into their lands, we exploit the breach, taking Damascus, Jerusalem, and days later, Cairo, ending the war for the Ottoman Empire. With all our forces now reconsolidating on the Russian front, victory is still far away, but after 2 years of fighting and several million dead collectively, both sides are facing massive supply deficits. A total offensive pressing up from Central Asia and east from Europe will aim to totally overwhelm Russia. Their forces are smaller, their stockpiles depleted, but so are ours. We need to stretch them thinner to a breaking point. For the Kaiser, for Europe, for liberty! All of the initial signatories have now been fully integrated into the European federal system. It is 2009. The European People's Party calls for a celebration. Wilfried Martens, in his last 4 years of life, announces his intention to retire in 2010. The legacy of Martens ending with a final victory for prolonged European security. Securing the European frontier and a permanent oil supply is security for a century or more, but as nuclear development continues with the sidelining of the SOC, there may someday be no need for oil. The world is by no means without tension. A giant Eurasian Cold War remains between the two economically codependent powers of Japan and ourselves. From the Russian taiga to the humid Indian subcontinent, a giant border exists between the world's two largest powers, both of whom facing internal issues, demographic crises, especially in Japan following their war with India, leading to an aging population and the worrying prospect of losing half their population by 2050. Their Korean provinces fare hardly any better, and the Chinese, and even us, suffer similar crises. Economic prosperity is its own downside, but perhaps the technology of tomorrow can solve the hardships of today. The future will be bright for Europe and the world. A union to last 1,000 years may someday unite the world and take to the stars beyond. But that is a pipe dream for our grandchildren's grandchildren. Today, we rest. Pax Europa Aeternum. Gott mit uns, mein Kameraden. Thank you for coming to part 2 of the German century. I'll be releasing a supercut a little bit after this. You probably have already seen that upload go up by now if you're just now hopping on the video. If not, welcome. I hope that you enjoy, or have already enjoyed, both parts. Let's hop right into our patrons. My $5 Knights of Biskin, Gangsta Plays, Panchak, The Irishman, Sime Cash App, Null Scorpion, Dedrin, L. Walter Doro, Protector of the Faith, General Secretary of the National Salvation Council, Luther Manhole, Santiago Soto, Gotts Hubner, Boosgumps, Cyclonus 777, Rainbow Flies, and my scones and taxpayers. Thank you all greatly for donating. Please join the Discord and ping me or speak in my DMs to receive your rolls. I'll see you all in the next one.